It's the evening of July 28, 1981. Clarence House. The night before the wedding that 750 million people are already positioning themselves to watch. A box arrives for Diana Spencer. Inside it, a gold signet ring, Prince of Wales feathers, and beneath them 2 Latin words engraved into the metal. Ich dien. I serve. There is a note with it, written in Charles's own hand. It does not say I love you. It does not say I can't wait for tomorrow. It says just look them in the eye and knock them dead. Diana read it. She set the ring down, and the next morning she got into the glass carriage and rode to St. Paul's Cathedral in front of the largest television audience ever assembled for a royal event, and she left that ring sitting exactly where she had placed it. Not forgotten, not overlooked. Left. Diana Spencer did not leave things by accident. Here is what that ring means, what that night actually contained, and why the photograph of her walking down that aisle toward a man who had told her the previous evening that he did not love her is not what the world was told it was. Every source in this video is authenticated, her own voice on tape, the testimony of the people she trusted, the biographers who worked from primary documentation, no speculation, no fairy tale, the real account. Before we go further, let's establish where this story comes from, because the sourcing matters more here than in almost any other Diana story you will encounter. In 1991, Diana sat alone in a room at Kensington Palace and recorded hours of private testimony for journalist Andrew Morton. No intermediary, no press office. Her voice, her words, her account of her own life. Those recordings were removed from the palace through a trusted contact and delivered to Morton piece by piece. When the resulting book was published in 1992, Diana publicly denied having contributed anything to it. The palace called Morton a fabricator. 5 years later, Diana died in Paris, and Morton released the original tapes. Her voice, unedited, undeniable. That is the foundation of what you're about to hear. But she didn't only confide in Morton. She spoke to Penny Thornton, her personal astrologer and one of the closest confidants of her adult life, who came forward in ITV's 2020 documentary to reveal things Diana had told her privately, things that had never been made public, including a specific confession about what happened the night before the wedding. She recorded private conversations with Peter Setterlin, her voice coach, in 1991. Those recordings surfaced in a Channel 4 documentary in 2017, 20 years after her death. Royal biographer Penny Junor documented the physical objects of this story in detail. Ingrid Seward's research confirmed what happened when Diana tried to stop the wedding entirely. Jenny Bond, the BBC's longtime royal correspondent, spoke privately with Diana on multiple occasions and later confirmed specific details for the Channel 5 documentary Charles and Camilla, King and Queen in Waiting. Every piece of what follows has a source. Every source is verified. And what these sources say, collectively and consistently, is completely different from the image broadcast to 750 million people on the morning of July 29, 1981. The ring was the last thing to arrive. It wasn't the first. Go back 3 weeks before the wedding. Diana is at St. James's Palace. She walks into the office of Michael Colborne, Charles's personal private secretary, and she sees a small box sitting on the desk. She asks what it is. Colborne hesitates. Diana is not the kind of person who accepts hesitation as an answer. He opens it. Inside the box is a gold bracelet. On it, engraved carefully, G and F. In the time it takes to read 2 letters, something fundamental and permanent shifts inside her. Gladys. Fred. The private nicknames Charles and Camilla Parker Bowles had for each other, a secret language built across years of an intimacy that predated Diana entirely, that she had never been part of and had never been invited into. A language she recognized the moment she saw it carved into that metal, not because anyone had told her about it, because some things don't require explanation. You simply know. This was not a piece of jewelry in any ordinary sense. It was a communication between 2 people who had their own private world, and it was being sent to that world 3 weeks before Charles's wedding to someone else. Jenny Bond, the BBC's royal correspondent, confirmed what happened immediately after Diana registered what she was looking at. Diana went directly to Charles. She wanted to know why he was sending a custom-engraved bracelet to Camilla 3 weeks before marrying her. Charles had an answer ready. It was a parting gift, a formal closing of that chapter of his life before the wedding. He framed it as something honorable, a clean ending, handled with consideration. Diana heard it differently. In her own words, recorded privately for Morton and never intended for public consumption. Rage, rage, rage. Why can't you be honest with me? But no, he cut me absolutely dead. Not defensively. Not with any attempt to engage with what she was feeling. Dead. The conversation was not worth having because the decision had already been made and her response to it was not part of the calculation. One additional detail. Penny Junor, working from extensive sourcing for her biography, The Duchess, The Untold Story, confirmed that the bracelet for Camilla was not an isolated gesture. In the weeks before his wedding, Charles sent farewell gifts to several women he had been close to. A formal accounting of his previous life, a distribution of goodbyes. Diana was not watching a man send a final note to someone he had once cared about. She was watching a man systematically close every chapter that had come before her, and what she couldn't determine with any certainty was which chapter she was in. Then came the phone call. She wasn't looking for it. That matters. Diana was not investigating. She was not following him, or going through his belongings or systematically searching for confirmation of what the bracelet had already suggested. She simply walked past a door at the wrong moment, or the right one, depending on how you understand what followed. Through the door, clearly audible, came Charles's voice. He was on a portable telephone in his bath. He didn't know she was there. She heard him say, "Whatever happens, I will always love you." She stood in the corridor and she listened. She knew exactly who was on the other end of the line. She didn't need to hear a name. She knew the specific register of his voice when he spoke to Camilla, the quality of it, the softness that had never once appeared when he spoke to her. She waited until the call ended. Then she walked in. What followed she described in the Morton recordings as a filthy row. Not a conversation, not even a confrontation in the formal sense. Something rawer and more painful than either of those words captures. Now hold the timeline for a moment, because the weight of it depends on understanding the sequence. This was not after the wedding. This was during the engagement. Diana had met Charles formally 13 times before agreeing to become his wife. 13 occasions of carefully managed, institutionally supervised contact before she said yes to marrying him. She had called him Sir until the day the engagement was announced. She was 19 years old, operating inside an institution that had been running for centuries and that had its own very clear sense of how her role in it was meant to be performed. And she was standing outside a bathroom door hearing the man she was about to marry tell someone else, with unmistakable tenderness, that he would always love her. Royal historian Hugo Vickers documented another moment from the same period. At Royal Ascot in June 1981, 5 weeks before the wedding, Charles turned to a friend at dinner and asked a question that would read as almost absurd if you didn't understand the absolute sincerity of it. He asked, "Do you think you can fall in love after you're married?" He was 32 years old, 5 weeks from his wedding. He was genuinely asking whether love was something that might arrive after the ceremony, because he knew it wasn't there yet, and the people around him knew it wasn't there yet, and Diana, beneath the dress fittings and the public appearances and the enormous institutional machinery moving her steadily toward the altar, was arriving at the same understanding through a completely different route. By July 28, 1981, Diana had the bracelet, she had the phone call. She had watched Charles refuse to answer her honestly on both occasions, not dishonestly, precisely, but in the specific way of someone who genuinely cannot understand why these things would matter. And now it was the night before. 3 things happened. The first, Charles told Diana directly that he did not love her. Penny Thornton, Diana's personal astrologer, held this information for nearly 30 years before coming forward on ITV in 2020. She said, "One of the most shocking things that Diana told me was that the night before the wedding, Charles told her he didn't love her." And then Thornton said something that adds a layer to the revelation that changes how you receive it. She said Charles didn't want to go into the wedding on a false premise. He thought he was being honourable. He thought telling a 20-year-old woman the night before her wedding, with her face already printed on commemorative merchandise, with 750 million viewers confirmed for the morning broadcast, that he didn't love her was the ethical choice, the right thing. He was squaring it with her. What Diana heard was something the word honourable cannot reach. She heard, "I know, I have always known, and I'm doing this anyway, and you are going to do it too." She told Thornton she didn't want to go through with it. She went to her father, Earl Spencer. According to Ingrid Seward's account, he told her that withdrawing at this point would constitute a gross discourtesy to the future king. That it was too late, that the process was irreversible. She went to her sisters, Sarah and Jane. Their response, in the direct language of older siblings, was, "Bad luck, Dutch. Your face is on the tea towel. You can't back out now." She was 20 years old. Her father said no. Her sisters said no. The palace said nothing because the palace had already arranged the architecture of the situation so thoroughly that it didn't need to say anything. Every direction she looked, the answer was already there. The second thing, she was left alone with it. Jane was somewhere in the building, but Jane Fellows was married to Robert Fellows, Charles's own private secretary. Diana had already developed an acute and accurate understanding of how information moved through palace networks. There were things she could not say in that building, questions she could not ask, because the person she might say them to was already part of the institution she was being absorbed into. In Andrew Morton's recordings, Diana described the state she arrived at that night, very, very deathly calm. She described herself as a lamb to the slaughter. Her words, she said, "I knew it, and I couldn't do anything about it. Deathly calm is not peace. It is not acceptance in any redemptive sense. It is the specific stillness that settles over a person who has exhausted every available option and stopped searching for one that doesn't exist." She had raged over the bracelet. She had had the filthy row over the phone call. She had gone to her father and her sisters and found the same wall in both directions. And now there was nothing left but to be still and let the morning come. The third thing, the box arrived from St. James's Palace. Inside it, the gold signet ring. "Prince of Wales feathers, Ishdeen, I serve," and the note in Charles's hand. "Just look them in the eye and knock them dead." The ring had history, Diana would have known. It had been worn by Edward V, the Prince of Wales, who became the king who abdicated, the man who chose the woman he loved over the crown, who walked away from the institution rather than let the institution decide his life for him. Charles sent Diana the ring of the man who got out on the night she had confirmed she could not, and the note. Read it in the context of everything that preceded it. No declaration, no tenderness, a pep talk, the kind a commanding officer delivers to someone about to undertake a difficult mission, the language of respect perhaps, possibly even of genuine admiration, but not the language of a man writing to a woman he loves the night before he marries her. Diana read it. She set it down. She did not put it on. The morning of July 29th, 1981. The Emmanuel gown went on first. Ivory silk taffeta, a 25-foot train, 10,000 mother-of-pearl sequins sewn into the fabric by hand. Then the Spencer family tiara. Then the sapphire engagement ring she had chosen herself from a Garrard catalogue because she liked it, because it was the biggest stone, because it reminded her of her mother's ring. That ring was hers, selected by her, belonging to her, representing something she had actually chosen. The signet ring stayed on the table at Clarence House. She got into the glass carriage. The crowd noise hit her like a physical thing, hundreds of thousands of people who had slept on the pavement the night before to secure their positions, now screaming her name, waving flags, pressing forward to see the beginning of what they had decided was a fairy tale. Diana described herself as still inside all of it. The deathly calm that had settled over her in the night had travelled with her into the morning. She was watching herself move through it from somewhere just outside the experience. The cathedral held 3,500 guests, 74 countries broadcasting, the largest royal television audience ever recorded. And somewhere in that carefully arranged congregation, Diana knew precisely where Camilla Parker Bowles was seated. She would not have been able to stop herself from knowing. She had studied that seating plan. Jenny Bond confirmed what happened when Diana's eyes found Camilla during the procession down the nave, an immediate unease that did not arrive gradually or after a moment of trying to override it. The moment her gaze landed, something tightened. She kept walking. At the altar, she spoke the vows. She was supposed to say Charles Philip, Arthur George. What emerged was Philip Charles Arthur George, the first two names transposed. Every account calls it nerves, an understandable mistake under extraordinary pressure. You have heard what the 48 hours before that moment contained. Name it whatever you want. Charles did not wear a wedding ring. That was a decision he had made in advance. Diana wore hers. The ceremony lasted just under an hour. They walked back down the aisle together. The carriage, the palace, the balcony, the kiss, famous, slightly formal, brief, which the crowd received as the confirmation of everything they had come to witness. 750 million people went home believing they had watched a love story begin. Nobody knew about the ring still sitting in its box at Clarence House. Nobody knew about what was in Charles's cufflink case on the royal yacht Britannia. But Diana was about to find out. The honeymoon began on August 1st, 1981. 14 days, the Mediterranean, the most romantic stage the palace could construct for the opening of a royal marriage. Diana found the cufflinks almost immediately. 2 interlocked letter Cs, elegant, personal. The kind of object you commission when you want someone to know that the thought behind it was specific to them alone. She already knew whose initial that was. In the private recordings made with voice coach Peter Setterlin in 1991, sessions that didn't surface publicly until the 2017 documentary 20 Years After Her Death, Diana described the moment without any softening. She said, "I said, Camilla gave you those, didn't she?" He said, "Yes, so what's wrong? They're a present from a friend." And boy, did we have a row. Jealousy, total jealousy. She used the word jealousy. She framed it herself that way. But sit with what was actually happening in that cabin on the Britannia and consider what the word jealousy is doing in that sentence. This wasn't jealousy in the ordinary sense of an insecure response to an imagined threat. This was a 20-year-old woman, 48 hours into her marriage, finding physical confirmation of every instinct she had carried down the aisle. The bracelet had been the suggestion. The phone call had been the certainty. The cufflinks were the proof that nothing had ended, that the parting gift Charles had described as the formal closing of a chapter had closed nothing at all, that she had been right from the first moment she saw those 2 initials engraved in gold, and that Charles, when he said "So what's wrong, they're a present from a friend," still genuinely couldn't locate the problem. That is what the word jealousy was covering. She wasn't irrational, she wasn't oversensitive. She wasn't, as the quiet institutional narrative had already begun to suggest, a young woman too inexperienced and too emotional to understand what she was seeing. She had understood from the beginning. She had been right about all of it, and her husband's response to her being right, on the second day of their marriage, was casual bewilderment that she would raise it at all. Here is the question that doesn't get asked. What did Charles think he was doing when he sent that ring? The honest answer, and it is more complicated than a simple reading of the situation provides, is that he meant it well. By July 28, 1981, Charles had a genuine admiration for Diana. He saw a young woman preparing to walk into something that would have dismantled most people, and he wanted to give her something to hold on to. The ring, the feathers, the note, these were, in his understanding of the situation, a form of encouragement. He was proud of her. He said so in the note. Paul Burrell, Diana's butler, and one of the people physically closest to her daily life at Kensington Palace, spoke about this in an interview with Marie Claire. He said, "It's such a sad thing to say that he never loved her, and so he never returned the compliment. He wasn't romantic. He tried to be, but he didn't have a romantic bone in his body. He tried. Those 2 words are the most devastating in that sentence. Not that he was deliberately cold, not that he intended harm. He tried to express something, and what came out was a signet ring engraved with a Latin phrase about duty and a note telling her to perform. That gap between what Charles was attempting to communicate and what Diana received is the gap that the entire marriage eventually fell through. Diana did eventually wear the ring, not on the wedding day, not on the honeymoon, but in 1983, 2 years after the wedding, she was photographed wearing it during a private session at Kensington Palace, and again in 1988 at a polo match, both times in settings away from the formal cameras, both times entirely on her own terms and her own timeline. She wore it when nobody was watching. She left it behind when the whole world was. What happened to it after she died? It went back to the royal collection. Charles, when he married Camilla on April 9, 2005, wore his own signet ring at the ceremony and added his wedding band directly on top of it, stacked on his left pinky finger. He is rarely photographed without both. Camilla wears a matching signet ring. The Prince of Wales feathers necklace Diana wore at the Vienna Berg Theatre in 1986, directly connected to the same royal insignia as the ring Charles sent her the night before the wedding, was taken into the royal collection after her death and redesigned into a brooch. Both Camilla and Catherine have been photographed wearing it at royal engagements, Diana's jewellery reshaped and redistributed, reworn. The sapphire ring she chose herself from the Garrard catalogue, the one that was hers from the moment she selected it, went to Prince William. He proposed to Catherine Middleton with it in 2010 on a mountainside in Kenya. Step back from the jewellery, from the specific objects, and look at what Diana was actually doing when she set that ring down. The rage had already run its course. It came with the bracelet 3 weeks before. It came in the filthy row after the phone call. It came when Charles cut her dead rather than engage with what she was feeling, and she hit the wall of understanding that the argument was not going to change anything. By the night of July 28th, the rage was spent. What was left was clarity. She knew what she was walking into. She had said so herself. Lamb to the slaughter, deathly calm. I knew it and I couldn't do anything about it. She was not deceived. She was not naive. She was a 20-year-old woman standing inside a machine that had been running for centuries, with every available exit sealed and the weight of a nation's constructed fairy tale pressing against her back. She read Charles's note, she looked at the ring, she set it down, not in anger and not in defiance. Defiance implies you still believe you have a choice, but in honesty, because wearing it down that aisle would have meant accepting the language it was written in. It would have meant agreeing, publicly and permanently, that what she was walking toward was defined by the word engraved into the metal. Ich dien, I serve. And Diana Spencer, whatever else the institution would spend the next 15 years trying to make her, was never once willing to pretend about the things that mattered most. She got into the carriage. She smiled at 750 million people. She transposed 2 names in her vows. She stood on a balcony and kissed a man who had told her 12 hours earlier that he didn't love her. And she left the ring on the table at Clarence House, where it told the truth about that day far more honestly than any photograph taken of her smiling ever did. If this video gave you something mainstream version never did, something sourced, something real, something that finally puts the pieces in an order that makes sense, subscribe to this channel. This is what we do here. We go into the archives, the private recordings, the testimonies that never made the front pages, and we tell you what actually happened. Hit subscribe, hit the bell, share this with someone who spent 30 years looking at that photograph of her on the balcony and sensing that the smile was covering something they were never told about. They deserve to know what it was covering, and there is more, because the ring was left behind on the morning of the wedding. But something else happened on the honeymoon. Something Diana described to 3 different people across 16 years in almost identical words. Something Charles said to her directly in a way she could not reframe or rationalize or absorb quietly. That is the next video. If you thought today was heavy, wait until you hear what he said back.